Hello, everyone. I'm James Latwell, your host for Authors on the Air. This is part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and we're in for a treat today. It's one of my favorite authors, and I know it's probably one of yours. It's Elly Griffiths. So, Elly, how are you?
Hi, hello. I'm so happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. Now, we're going to talk today about her newest work. I hope you can see that. Well, I'll actually get to the right page. We'll come back to that. Elly has a new book out. It's actually a collection of short stories called The Man in Black and Other Stories. But I mean, this is, I think, her 31st Elly Griffiths book. It's amazing. That's, a huge milestone. And, if you haven't run across her work yet for her beloved, Ruth Galloway series, the Harbinder Kaur series, I mean, there are so many characters and stories involved that no matter which one you pick up, you're gonna fall in love with it and want to go back and read the rest. So it's a thrill to have you here, Elly.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So this is a little bit of a departure. It's a collection of short stories, some of which have familiar characters to us. But how was it that you came to curate this particular collection?
Well, it was interesting, really, because it's sort of gathered together over the years, really, that I've been writing short stories and sort of put them to one side. And I always wrote short stories. Before I was published, I wrote it when I was 11. I wrote a short story called The Hair of the Dog, which was about a murder mystery, actually. But it's funny because that must have been a phrase my parents used, but I didn't know what it meant. And of course, it means if you drink too much the night before, you should have a drink the next day. So, but I've always liked the form. I've always loved reading Agatha Christie short stories and ghost stories. So it was lovely to get a chance to write my own collection and to add to it. And I read, somebody said, I can't remember who said it, but I think it's a really good quote. Somebody said, a novel is like a marriage, but a short story is like an affair. And I really liked that idea because, as you said, I've got these long-running series, Dr. Ruth Galloway, Harbinder Kaur, the Brighton Mysteries. And this meant I could be a bit unfaithful to them, but in a good way.
In a good way. No, in a very good way. I keep losing this every time I try to pick it up. Yeah, The Man in Black and Other Stories. Yeah. And it was really fun to kind of read some of the stories with familiar characters that we knew, like Ruth and Harbinder. But my question was, where did these stories come from? Were they kind of bits of character development residue that were kind of left bouncing around in your head? Or were these pieces of the characters that you just hadn't told that part of the story yet?
I think a bit of both, really, actually, because when you do write, quite a long series, you write about these people, there are always little bits you can't show. So I really wanted to show, for example, you get to see Max Mephisto, my magician, doing his first ever disappearing act when he's about 18, and he's quite a sort of suave figure in the books that I write, but this is him starting out. He doesn't quite know how to approach the girl that he likes. He doesn't know how to make her disappear. He learns how to do both in the short story, so to catch them at different points in their life. And also Justice Jones, my schoolgirl heroine, you get to see her grown up, so that's the other end of it, really. And also just bits of their life that you don't see otherwise. So in Ruth's First Christmas Tree, you see Ruth over Christmas, which I never get to quite do in the books. And one of my favorites was I got to write a short story from the point of view of Ruth's cat, Flint. And my wonderful editor, Jane, so I've been so lucky to have had the same editor for all 31 books, which, Jim, is so unusual, isn't it? To have the same editor for all your books, and so wonderful for me. But she's always a little bit against me writing too much about the cat, probably because I would just get too sentimental and silly. And I'll write in a book something like, Flint's feeling bored, and Jane will say in the margin, he's not bored, he's a cat. So this was my chance to write our short story from his point of view. So things like that. And of course, other stories that were not from characters in the book, from totally new stories and just little bits that I wanted to write about, like Little Women and the ski lift at Capri and the footprints on the shore at Haysborough. So all those little things.
Yeah, and you mentioned two of my favorites in the collection, whereas the story told from Flint's point of view. That was just hilarious. Oh my God.
Thank you.
What made you think of approaching a story with, a cat's sensibility, right front center?
Well, I have a cat. I'm talking to you from my writing shed in the garden, and I've kept the door open, even though it's a bit cold, because he might well come in. So I do love cats, and I've always had animals, so I love cats. And Ruth's cat Flint has been quite a character in the stories, despite Jane wanting to play down his role. He's played. So I felt that he's somebody who's been there through all of it. He's seen everything. But I thought it would be nice to try and do it with his voice. And I think that's the thing about short story, isn't it? Because I wouldn't have, you'll probably be relieved here, I wouldn't really have the confidence to write a whole book, like 80,000 words from the point of view of a cat. But I thought I probably could manage 5,000 words, and just exploring the fact that, Flint loves Ruth. Of course, he loves the fact that she doesn't try and understand him. He's a bit wary of Cathbard because he tries to understand him, tries to speak cat. And of course, he's very wary of Nelson, doesn't really approve of Nelson at all. So that was just really fun for me to try that voice out, that slightly disapproving voice that you imagine a cat might have.
Yeah, and I think you pulled it off really well, especially when he talks about Nelson as that man with the dog, and
yes.
the dog man. Yeah.
Nelson has a dog, and Flint can obviously smell this dog, and he thinks smell just how stupid this dog is, and he just doesn't want to have him anywhere near him. So yes, that's Flint's point of view.
Yeah, very good. The other story that really kind of popped out with me is Ruth, the story about Ruth's first Christmas tree. And because there's so much wrapped around that story about, the emotion and the relationship with her daughter and the holidays. I thought that was really a poignant story, but told in a way that it made it a lot of fun. Where did that story come from?
Oh, thank you so much. That's so lovely to hear that you enjoyed the stories. Well, as I said, even though I've written all these books about Ruth, and that they're all sort of at different points of the year, and I've sort of followed her through winter, spring, summer, autumn, but I've never sort of followed her over Christmas. So I wanted to have a Ruth Christmas story and to really make it as Christmassy as I can. It's about her getting a Christmas tree and decorating it and that going wrong. And then she's stuck out in the snow at one point trying to come home. So all those Christmassy sort of themes. So I wanted to bring them all into the book, but I also wanted to talk about friendship, really, which is what the story is about. And the fact that Ruth has a kind of unconventional friendship, a sort of family of choice. She has Cathbard, her druid friend, and she has Nelson, with whom she has a complicated relationship. And they end up having a very unconventional Christmas tree, which you'll see why when you read the story. But it also kind of celebrates their unconventional family in a way.
That's very true. Now, what is it about, and this is going a little bit beyond the anthology, what is it about Ruth Galloway and Harbinder Kaur and Cathbard that just pull readers into their stories? I mean, what is it that brings people to those stories? Because there's a real attraction there.
Oh, well, that's really nice of you to say, and I love it when people do have that connection with Ruth, particularly Ruth, I guess. And I'm not even sure exactly myself why it is. I hoped when I wrote about Ruth, who's a forensic archaeologist, she lives in Norfolk on the far east coast of England. When we first meet her, she lives on her own with her cats. She's quite a private person. And when I was first writing about her, I thought, will people want to read about this woman who lives on her own and prefers cats to people? Turns out that is an absolute struck a chord with people. People, I think, like the fact that although she's very confident in her work, she's not always confident in herself. She's not the sort of woman who knows how to tie a scarf, for example. And Nelson's wife, Michelle, was born knowing how to look wonderful in a scarf. So all those things, she has her insecurities. And I think people have liked that. And I think that's maybe chimed with people. But I hope so, because it's so wonderful, really, when people start to have, if you like, their own relationship with Ruth and with Nelson and with Cathbard. And goodness knows with Cathbard, because in the first book, The Crossing Places, Cathbard's just another suspect, he's just a passing druid, really. But he's just somehow taken over the book. Who knows how?
I mean, let's see, I think it was the Stranger Diaries that won the Edgar Award.
Yes.
And that was just, it was another fantastic book. And that was where I had a chance to kind of meet you, and then COVID happened, and then
yes.
You couldn't come, and
Yes,
kind
because
of
I was
thing.
coming
But
over, wasn't I? And you were going to interview me. It
yes,
was such a shame.
yes. So we finally caught up some years
Yes,
later.
thank goodness.
But and I've asked the same question of Peter James and Fiona Barton, and I'll ask it to you. What is it about British crime fiction that is so attractive to an American audience? Because there's a real draw over here for all three of you. What is it that brings an American audience to your books?
That's a really good question. And I'm not even sure that I know the answer. Funnily enough, I did an event with Peter at the weekend because we're both from Brighton. So we know each other quite well. He's such a great writer. I know Fiona too, who's lovely. I wonder if it is, I suppose, possibly this slightly old school, though you couldn't accuse Peter's books of being old school, but this slightly golden age feeling that you might get, which links these modern books to writers like Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers, and just this slightly old world setting. Although, in certainly in the Harbinder books and the Ruth books, they're modern, although they have a sort of historical, slightly ghosty tinge to it. And I think particularly The Stranger Diaries, I was so delighted when that won the Edgar, because it is a very British book. It's sort of set in this little town and partly set in this school, which is a state school, but is in an old manor house, really, that was once owned by a Victorian short story writer. So it has all those Victorian short story tropes in it, really. So it's wonderful that it was taken to people's hearts in America. And I wonder if it just is that kind of link with the past and with further backstories, people like Dickens and Collins and those sort of slightly let's all gather around the fire moments.
Right. No, that could be it. That's a good explanation for it, because I mean, you're very popular here in our neck of the woods, and for good reason. I mean, the books are fantastic. I mean, I've enjoyed them. I know my circle of friends enjoy them as well. Now, you have kind of a unique way of keeping your characters fresh, even though it might not be a story featuring a certain character. You'll have characters kind of pop up in various stories, like I think it was the Postscript murders.
Yes.
Characters kind of came in there that were in an earlier book. That's kind of a unique way to keep people engaged in a long-term series with familiar characters like that. How did you come to think of that?
Do you know, I think I'm just not very good at writing standalones, because The Stranger Diaries is meant to be a standalone, and it features, as you say, this detective Harbinder Kaur. And I did really like writing about her. She's quite sparky and she's quite dry, has kind of dry sense of humor. I think the first thing she said is, let's assume I'm in charge. And she's from a British Indian family. She's gay. She's not quite out to her parents. So she had kind of an interesting backstory, but I thought she would only appear in that book. And as you say, along comes the Postscript murders, and who's the detective that turns up? It's Harbinder. So I have really enjoyed, in a way, making this, I don't know, this universe that has all these different characters in it. And in fact, in the short stories, the very last short story is called Ruth Galloway and the Ghost of Max Mephisto. And it's the only story so far that has Ruth and Nelson, it has Harbinder, and it sort of has Max Mephisto in it too. So it's the only time I brought all three of them together.
That's amazing. Yeah. That was a lot of fun. Now, what's next from you, Elly? What are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on something quite exciting, actually. So as you know, the 15th Ruth book was out last year, and that's called The Last Remains. And I've kind of said that's the last Ruth book for now. I have not been, I haven't been too prescriptive about it. I've just said it's the last for now. So I'm having a little bit of a break from Ruth, or she's having a break from me, who knows. So I've got a new book coming out in February. So it's out in the UK in February. I think it'll be in the US in June. And it's called The Frozen People. And it's about a detective called Ali Dawson, who lives and works in the East End of London. And she works for a cold case unit. And the joke amongst the unit is that they're cold. Their cases are so cold, they're frozen because they're so old. And that's why they're the frozen people. But actually, they're so old because they go back in time to solve them. So she's a time-traveling detective. And in fact, this is I know. So this is the UK cover. The American cover is just as good, but very different. But that's it. It's very, it's very glittery.
Oh, wow.
So that's,
yeah.
And at the back, I think it says, "Some murders can't be solved in just one lifetime." So it's, in some ways, it's not different, because I feel like Elly will appeal to people who like Ruth or Harbinder. But in other ways, it's really different because they're traveling in time.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm looking forward to that. That should be a lot of fun to read. Yeah. Now, it's only recently that I came upon a fact that Ruth, as a forensic anthropologist, you kind of have some familial ties to that field that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, so really, the whole idea for the Ruth books came because my husband Andy, well, he was a lawyer when we first met, but then he'd kind of always been interested in archaeology. And when our kids were still quite young, he said he'd really like to sort of change careers. So he left the law and went back to university and studied archaeology. And it was really that made me interested in archaeology. So I have to say I have his change of career to thank, because he told me about people called forensic archaeologists. And it was one day when we were walking across marshland in Norfolk with our young children, he made a comment about marshland and how prehistoric people thought it was sacred because it's neither land nor sea, but something in between. And that's why they saw it as a link to the afterlife. And that really gave me the whole idea for the Ruth books. And that's how Ruth was born. I've got to say, Andy hasn't been my consultant for all the books. I don't think we could quite cope with that. But he's introduced me to particularly two brilliant women archaeologists who have helped me. So yes, it was really his change of career that prompted my change of direction as a writer.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I found that little fact, and it's like, oh my God, what a background. Yeah.
Well, it's great, really, because an archaeologist looks at the world in such a different way. You know, Andy can look at a hillside, and I remember when the kids were little, there's a hill near here called Mount Caban, and he said to them, "There's a fort on the top of this hill." And of course, the kids are really excited because they thought it would be a castle. So we went all the way up, and tell you, a long way up the hill. And of course, there's no fort. There's just a dip in the ground. That's all that's left of an Iron Age hill fort. But for Andy, that was amazing. And he was saying to the children and me, "Look at this fort." And we were like, "Oh, great. Can we have a picnic?"
Yeah, we went all the way up here for this.
Yeah,
okay.
And there's really nothing here. Where are the battlements? Where are the castles? But to an archaeologist, that little dip in the ground is everything.
I love it. Elly, we'll finish up with something we're calling 3 quick hits. And it's 3 questions. Put yourself in Ruth's head as the character. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. What's Ruth's favorite drink or her cocktail of choice?
Oh, Ruth likes a glass of red wine.
How about Ruth's favorite music? What does she like to listen to?
This is easy because it is kind of mine as well. She's a massive Bruce Springsteen fan, and her favorite song is Thunder Road.
Okay,
also
I can see that. I can see that. And then finally, what's Ruth's greatest fear?
Oh, what's Ruth's greatest fear? Well, Ruth really hates being in small enclosed spaces, which is why I'm always putting the poor woman in there. But I like every parent, her worst fear would be something happening to her daughter Kate.
Yeah, I think I agree. Folks, we've been talking with Elly Griffiths. She's a tremendous author. If you have a chance, grab this new collection of short stories. You won't be disappointed. They're like little nuggets that of all these characters that we've come to grow and love over the years. And you can kind of get a little bit more texture there. And we found out there's a new time traveling mystery coming out next year. So you're going to want to grab that too. Thanks for spending some time with us, Elly.
Thank you. And it's great to finally get to chat with you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Take care.
Bye.